So welcome everyone to MLPD's webinar on lived experience, the policy table. My name is Melissa Graham. I'm the executive director of the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities. I have blonde hair and blue glasses and a gray sweater. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going to give our presenters and other people in the room the opportunity to introduce themselves in a moment. I just want to explain a bit about who we are. So actually, and why we're here, and give a land acknowledgement. So Manitoba, the Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities acknowledges the work we do to support Manitobans with disabilities and gifts. This work takes place on the traditional lands and waterways of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, as well as the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties made here and all locations we are participating from, and are grateful to work, live, and interact on this land. So today's webinar on lived experience at the policy table is part of a larger project funded by Elections Canada to provide public education to Manitobans with disabilities and gifts about federal elections in Canada. Last year, we focused this project on candidates with disabilities, and this year we are focusing on the importance of making sure that candidates and politicians are informed about disability issues. Just as a gentle reminder as we get into this, that Elections Canada requires us to be nonpartisan, and we ask all speakers and participants to please keep this in mind for their comments so we don't have to edit anyone out. So I'm here today with David Kron from Barrier Free Manitoba and Janet Rodriguez from Disability Without Poverty. Also helping us out here is Cheryl Peters from MLPD, and we have our wonderful ASL interpreter. I'm going to actually, Cheryl, you might as well introduce yourself a little bit too, but then I'll let David and Janet introduce themselves and we'll get into the questions. Sound good?
That sounds great. Hi, I'm Cheryl Peters. I'm the projects manager at Manitoba League of Persons with Disabilities. I have many hats. Today, I will be facilitating the Zoom here. David?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm David Kron. I'm a male, fairly balding, Caucasian guy with that's part of the steering committee of Barrier Free Manitoba. My job is I'm the executive director of the Cerebral Palsy Association of Manitoba.
And shall we pass this on then to Janet?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Janet Rodriguez. I use she and her pronouns. I am a cisgender, straight, racialized immigrant woman living with visible and invisible disabilities. I am brown skin. I have shoulder length brown hair, dark eyes. I'm wearing glasses in a light green top. I'm greeting you all from Pacaronto, also known as Toronto in Ontario. This is Treaty 13 territory of the Anishinaabe, Huron-Wendat, and Haudenosaunee peoples, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. I'm very thrilled to be here on behalf of Disability Without Poverty.
Thank you, both of you. For our process today, we're just going to be going back and forth with questions, but if any of you want to comment on each other's questions, that's okay too. Cheryl is going to be monitoring the comments and questions, and we'll allow time for questions and comments as time permits.
Feel free, though, to put your comments and questions in the chat, and we will get to them and hopefully be able to give you an answer.
Okay. So, David, I'm going to start with you first.
Okay.
What made you decide to get involved with Barrier Free Manitoba?
So Barrier Free Manitoba, just to give a little context, is just a network of different organizations and individuals that off the side of their plates in 2008 wanted to change the landscape of Manitoba, and they advocated with the government of the day to get the Accessibility for Manitobans Act passed. And what we really want to do is change the way we do business in Manitoba and be proactive and eliminate barriers before they happen or as they happen, so people don't have to do a personal, like sue them or a human rights complaint every time there's some sort of barrier in their lives. So I just wanted to change the world in essence and wanted to eliminate barriers as I see them. It's frustrating as a person with cerebral palsy that walks with a cane that, you know, you can't crawl over the snowbank or you can't climb up the stairs, or there's so many barriers, and disability is such a broad spectrum that we really need to have legislation and changing the culture so that we can affect change.
Thanks, David. And what about you, Janet? What made you decide to get involved in Disability Without Poverty?
Well, I believe in movements, and accessibility and disability justice issues are everyone's work. So when Disability Without Poverty opened up doors and invited anyone who felt that this is something they want to participate in, I raised my hand. And I also know that poverty, which is another issue that I'm concerned about, is prevalent among those who live with disabilities. Statistics Canada identifies that at least 30% of people who are poor also identify as living with a disability, and many people believe this is an under reported number. The latest numbers from Statistics Canada is that people age 15 and up who identified as living with a disability are right now the percentage is 27%. It used to be 22%, and in 5 years it has shot up to be 27%. And as the population grows, this percentage will also grow. Unfortunately, poverty among those of us who are disabled will also grow.
Thank you. Now I know both of you in your different kinds of work have had to engage with politicians to make your organization successful. So what do you think has made your organization so successful in engaging with politicians? Throw it back to David.
Sure. So, you know, what you really need to do is start by finding allies within the political parties and individuals and within departments and nurturing those relationships. And, you know, proving to them over time that you're not going away, that you're going to be there consistently. So we've done a really good job of keeping the fire to the toes of the politicians, even after the bill was passed in 2013. You know, we always do an annual report. We always ask for annual or regular meetings with the department and with the politicians. We also want to make sure that we are consistent over time, right? So when there is an announcement, we react to it. We criticize, we praise, we do all the things that we need to do. In the past, just as you know, when we don't get movement with politicians, we did a report card in 2023, and we basically gave the government a failing grade on implementation of the AMA. We've also done broken promises card campaign where you wrote your MLA with, you know, your broken promises and showing that, you know, we're not going away and that we have the political power to mobilize. One of the things that Barrier Free started back in 2019 provincial election is we started Disability Matter Votes campaign along with abilities, and we've had really good success that way. And so we show up at the election and we ask all the different governments and parties. And we've also worked with Elections Manitoba to make sure that the elections are accessible and open to all individuals. So it's all about education and finding allies and then moving the needle forward. And it needs consistent, constant pressure to do that.
Thanks, David.
That's very good, David. I have a lot to learn from you. Well, we at Disability Without Poverty, as I said, it started with a movement. We started with a lot of arts and discussions in town halls where people from all the different provinces and territories speaking in English or en français, and also through ASL interpretation as well as SLQ for those who sign and speak in French. We organized these town halls and allowed for conversations to dispel the myths about what is political work. You know, sometimes people think that political work is partisan work, and we were specifically not committed to any political party, but rather to the grassroots political work to change the lives of people with disabilities and their families. And so we also did some skill building. In sales, they teach you these ABC. That means always be closing. In our case, we trained or have many conversations and gave any participant the opportunity to connect with their MPP. This is at the, MP at the federal level. And also we encourage them to always be asking them for a yes vote to Bill C-22.
Great, Janet. You gave me a good segue there when you're talking about informing people about doing political work. I think for a lot of people that haven't done this before, they might not know what it's like. They might think maybe it's just really boring and dry and sitting around tables all the time, or people have different perceptions of what it's like to do this work. So what I really want to ask you both is, what is it like for you doing this work and working with the team of people that you work with?
Gia, I can start. It's really building the team around you and then reaching out to build the community to support you. Barrier Free on our Facebook, you know, in our mailing list, we have over 4,000 people that follow us. We've spent years building that network. I have a really extensive work with the media, and you know, when we send out a press release, I prep the journalists that it's coming so that they can tell their editors that it's coming. So unless there's a big fire that day or whatever, we generally get press on it. And once you get in those loops, the politicians and just the folks get to know that we have connections. And you know, you never want to threaten or draw lines in the sand unless you're willing to activate that, because they're going to call you on it one day. But the other hand is you have to be respectful and you have to move forward. And it's constant pressure is really the key. And, you know, Janet had a good point that everybody in this world is going to be disabled at one point in their life. I was born with CP. Other people might, you know, be in a traffic accident and break their leg for 3 weeks. Well, guess what? You're differently abled for, you know, lack of a term, and you need an accessible world for that to happen. Or it might be at the end of life, you know, you need all those services. So, you know, whether it's income and poverty or whether it's supports for the physical or communications, employment, customer service built environment. We need all those different things to make our world a better place. Canada is very fortunate. We're a very rich country, and Manitoba is a rich province. And we just need to make sure that we're listened to and heard, because there is a lot of us across Canada. So I think I probably went on a bit of a tangent there, but anyway, yeah, it's fun work to do.
Yeah, I'm going to start exactly there. I think, and I think I joined because it was fun work. People made it fun. The first time that I attended one of the DWP sessions, it was hosted by Luca Lazy Legs Patuelli, who many people may know him from dancing. So You Think You Can Dance Canada. He actually uses crutches and he does break dance. So it's kind of very famous in Canada. And there were other artists and dancers and poets. So all of this was in celebration of the strength of the community. And these were people from, there was Indigenous artists that were sharing their songs and different kinds of artistic expression. But at the root of it all was the strength-based focus that us, people with disability, we have a lot to share, and we have a lot of knowledge, and we have full lives. Unfortunately, society doesn't see us in the way we see ourselves and exclude us from education and from work. So we were able to be in a good mind. We were in a good way meeting with that strength. So then we can actually move into setting up, making room to set up a table where people were allowed and invited to critique. We making sure that people were represented in the way they wanted to be represented, not in a tokenistic way. And also making sure that the communications were clear and simple. So the movement had these 3 points that were on the website, very clear, no big words, no academic terms. So anyone could say, yes, I identified with that. And they could turn around and with that skill, advocate one-on-one with their representatives.
Great. Well, you keep giving me good segues, Hannah. How well do you think the representatives that you work with understand accessibility and inclusion?
They don't, to be honest. And it's not, part of my job is to bring awareness and to educate them. But it also is, I can't be the accessibility police. They have a definite role as the government to teach themselves. They have a bureaucracy of thousands to do that, do the research. I'm tired of getting consulted over and over and over again, and you tell them what you need and you tell them what you want, and they ignore you. So, they don't know it. But also, it's our responsibility. You never get anything that you don't ask for. And that's why you have to be consistent over time, and you have to build allies. You have to affect change. People don't know what they don't know. And it's slowly incremental change over time. I wish we would really have those eureka moments, and every once in a while you get, those bits. But it really is that you have to be there all the time. And also we also have to educate them that this is a human right. We're not looking for charity. We're all humans. We just happen to have a disability. That's a small part of my life, right? And that's what I want to, and I don't want to bring out the pity party every time. And it's not about, I'm trying to change the world, but I'm trying to change the attitudes. Those are the biggest barriers, right? Those unspoken thoughts and barriers that, you know, if you have a problem, talk to me about it. We can overcome it together. But if you don't talk to me, I can't help you, right? And that's really, so I don't expect them to know anything about disability or accessibility. We'll lead the way. You just gotta have to get out of the way. So
I agree significantly with what you have said, David. And I have to say that when we went to Parliament Hill, actually, before the second reading was unanimously voted by every single member of Parliament, we set up meetings with different MPs. And to my surprise, many of them either had a child with a disability, or now they had a parent with a disability, or their spouse was going through critical illness. Somebody in their environment had again, devastating accident. So they were able, in a one-on-one basis, able to focus on how, I think this was the first time somebody asked them about what was their experience with issues of disability, and they were candid enough to share very personal stories. And or some of them, and this is from every party, even, you know, Green Party, Conservatives, Independents, Liberals, everybody. And they were actually, everyone, as I said, voted in favor. Even those who were tough and were asking us questions, do you think this is going to work? Is this going to solve the poverty problem? We were also honest and we told them it's a multiple pronged approach. But they were, if you are, if you can get to that level to have an intimate conversation, they actually will understand and will ask questions that are not extractive, like you say, hey, tell me what to do, right? They are actually building, how can I be of help? So that was our experience.
and before we go on, the AMA Act in Manitoba was passed unanimously by the Manitoba Ledge. But the implementation has been really slow and weak, right? So, you know, with Bill C-22, yes, it was passed, but you know, the devil's in the details, and that's why you have to consistently be on them to get the regulations right and get the budgeting right, the resources and everything. So unfortunately, it isn't just getting the legislation passed, it's changing the culture. And you know, we do have successes and barrier free with DM vote. We did go to every candidate in the provincial election and say, what's your experience with disability? And we got some really good feedback from candidates and current MLAs that did get elected. So, you know, it's again, connecting the dots for people, I guess, is the real joy, right? And joy in a good way, because we are changing lives. So
thank you for that. So as you're working with candidates and MLAs and NPs, what are some of the barriers you think politicians have to understanding accessibility and inclusion?
Resources. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to is, I mean, as an MP or an MLA or MPP in Ontario, they get bombarded by 100 different interests, right? And what we really need to do is show them that, you know, 27% of the Canadian population have disabilities, that there's votes in it for them to activate. These are good news stories for them, right? It's really low-hanging fruit as far as, you know, it is easier for people to understand a disability than it is, let's say, climate change, right? And that's like, or whatever that case is. And so consistency at the table, I think, is the key to be there. And but you gotta know what their pressures are on and help them overcome them. I've said to politicians, well, this is a political problem that you're having. What do you need at the cabinet table to get this through? And they've told me, right? We need this many signatures. We need a rally. We need stuff in the press. We need you to give us political cover when we do go, and people that are talking about the deficit or whatever the financial thing is. So, you know, it's building those relationships at the start is key.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true. And in Ontario, I mean, the whole Canada, the average of people with disabilities is 27%. In Ontario, because we have a large population, is 28%. So the barrier, I think, that politicians and in general, any person in a position of authority that I have met with, one of the other hats that I use in healthcare, whether faculties of medicine or universities or hospitals, is the fact that attitude is the biggest barrier. The sad part is that they don't even notice that they are creating, establishing these barriers. They come with good intentions. They are very well-meaning. They even invest resources only to create barriers. So not only the attitudinal barrier exists, sometimes because they are blinded, but also there's this confusion created by the legal system and the medical system that uses disability and impairment as synonyms, as one and the same thing, when in fact they are not. I'm going to tell you a story. This is a real life story. It's not my life, but it's real. In Ontario, we have a champion for disability. He's a lawyer and he's blind. And one day he's practicing in Ontario courts. He's ready to present his case. And suddenly he hears, "Whoa," in silence. So he asks, "What's the problem?" The judge announces, "Sorry, everybody, we'll have to postpone today's court hearing." So he asks again, "What's the problem?" And the judge says, "Well, the power went off. Nobody can see a thing." So this blind lawyer says, "So what's the problem?" He, who had an impairment, was the only person who was ready to function, proceed, and go ahead with whatever was in front of him. Everybody else who was sighted were disabled. That's the difference. The disability is not part of my body. The impairments are part of my body. My chronic illnesses and diagnoses are part of my body. But the limitations that I encounter when I have to use services, fulfill basic needs like food and shelter, and those who withhold the food and shelter or access to money in this capitalist society, they are the ones who impose the system. Who's allowed to get housing? The person who can pay rent. Who's allowed to get food? The person who can buy groceries. So who can get the money? The person who can work. And if I cannot work, I'm legislated to live in poverty with whatever amounts of money my provincial government decides to assign my life and my needs are worth. And by the way, I am not an ODSP recipient, and ODSP is the provincial system that allows for benefits. It's Ontario Disabilities Supports Program. I want to go slow for the interpreter. So the amount for one person is $1,300. The rent for one room is $2,000. So just putting it out there to see that there's confusions. So when we explain to the politicians that disability is what you can eliminate, you can eliminate the barriers, you can create access, they feel actually empowered. They feel like, oh, I have a role here. Because if you only talk about disabilities, they say, I'm not disabled. I don't have a disability. That's not my thing. And even in activism, people feel because of our capitalist way of production, even the activism work we do is in silos. I'm a woman, so women's issues is on me. But I'm not trans woman, so I won't talk about them. And that is wrong. If I oppress because I'm disabled or because people exclude me due to my impairments, because of my oppression, I'm going to be in solidarity with others who are oppressed because of race, gender minority, status. And in that way, we educate the politicians to let them see they can find a solution to eliminate barriers. But we also do some teaching on self-advocacy, so people feel that they have rights and that they can do things and that they should join in solidarity, not just with other people with disabilities, but with other people who live in poverty because of their exclusion and oppression.
Thank you, Janet. If I could just kind of recap you for a little bit there. I hear you talking a lot about intersectionality and the importance of bringing different movements together. I also heard some points where I think politicians and general society at large can make assumptions about the lived experience of people with disabilities and parents and what counts as a disability, what doesn't. I think a particular important point you mentioned when you were bringing up ODSP, which is the social assistance program in Ontario, is there's kind of the assumption that either you're working or you're on these programs and somehow your needs are covered, right? And I think that's something that both of you are trying to crack in different ways. And I wanted to highlight that part of the benefit of bringing lived experience, and I think is to kind of crack these assumptions. Which brings me to my next question: how does having lived experience at the policy table help politicians do their job better? I think you both kind of addressed that, but if there's ways you want to elaborate on that, that would be great.
I'll just start off. One is, once you get known to politicians and bureaucrats, and you build relationships so that I never make a big deal of my disability, but I don't also hide it either, right? I had a therapist tell me in my 20s that I had to be proud of my cerebral palsy. Like, I have to ask for help when I need it, because nobody does a really good job at reading minds. So, being open and communicating what you need and what assistance up you want. The old adage is, a rising tide lifts all boats, is important, but we also need to make sure that we are at the table, that we're not taken for granted, and we're not dismissed as, well, we know better than you do, and we'll just decide what you need, right? And it's, how do we value people with disabilities? How do we value marginalized communities, whether it's in poverty, whether you're Indigenous, whatever that thing is? How do we value people in Canada and in Manitoba and in Ontario? Again, we're a very wealthy country, and we need to have a rising tide so that we lift all boats. So I don't have to advocate and fight and, apply, have my whole medical history on the line again, whether I'm qualified or not, whether I'm disabled or not, to qualify for these programs. it really is that simple. It's a human right, and it's across the board. And that's what we all need to do is get in there and get to the table. You got to be at the table for those people that are making decisions. So whether it be a candidate, whether you're an activist, whether you're a media spokesperson, whatever your role is, and it could just be an individual parent or individual that likes to write letters. I always tell people, if nothing else, if you got to write a letter to them, they have to answer it at some point. So, those are all those different things that I think is important.
That's actually very good. I'm glad, this you have had that experience. Again, I'm going to steal quite a few of these strategies. The way that I think, having lived experience, and we were lucky that we were able to have a few of the politicians identify that they do live with disability, for example, hard of hearing. The minister at the time, Minister Qualtrough, is very publicly known that she is, has low vision or is considered legally blind. And the way we approach some politicians we've never met, we went with a humility approach, not as we're the experts. We just presented ourselves as regular people, as electors, because we're their constituents. And we're not the expert, because disability is not a one thing. It's many things, and it's different from person to person, precisely like you were saying, David, because of who they are. If you are an Indigenous person who have lived with intergenerational trauma, you may have barriers that is going to exclude you because of racism or anti-Indigenous racism, but also because of your mental health illness. I'm not just saying this out of the top of my head. There's statistics that, unfortunately, even though the whole population of Indigenous peoples in Canada is about 4 or maybe 5% now, they're the only group that is actually growing in numbers. 5% of the population of Canada are First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. But in the prison system, half of the women are in prison are Indigenous. Why? What's going on? What's happening? Are we criminalizing the behavior that results from their trauma and mental illness rather than providing care for it, providing social determinants of health to eliminate the inequities? Are we training lawyers and doctors with the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action so they can understand the experience of disability, people who are Black, or queer, or immigrants like me, right? So people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities who unfortunately may need another person to speak for them. So there's a rich opportunity, but like David was saying at the beginning, we cannot be the ones to teach. Everyone has a responsibility to educate themselves on this.
Thank you, both of you. You're giving such great answers, giving me chills. So I just have a few more questions, kind of shifting the direction a bit. So these questions are more for folks that might be watching the video here today. So if there's someone here, either in the room here or watching the video later on, who's working with a politician to try and support their understanding of an accessibility issue, what advice would you give them?
tell your story in a way that says, I always like to tell people never make you statements, make I statements, right? Don't blame them. You got to tell them, I need this and I need it in order to get out into the community. I need this to fulfill a full job. I'm working 3 jobs and I'm still not making enough money, right? Like, the whole thing is we want the whole system, we want to solve problems. And I think most politicians want to go to work every day to do good. That's why they want to run for office. They want to affect change. And we need to support them in order to do that. And we need to support the ones that are active in supporting our communities. And we need to call out the ones that aren't in a nice, respectful way. I mean, again, making I statements, not you statements. Like, I can't understand how you got there. Can you tell me, right? What pressures are you under, right? I don't know what's going on in all their lives, and I'm here to keep moving a heavy ball up a mountain that's greasy, right? And if you don't keep pushing it up the mountain, you go backwards. So in the past couple years, austerity was kind of the rule. And I said to some colleagues, I said, well, if we weren't doing this, where would we be? Sometimes the status quo isn't great, but if you don't keep the pressure up, you go backwards, and we want to keep it moving forward. So again, building allies, building relationships, building the momentum over time, and not being afraid to activate and have action. At a certain point, you can write all the letters you want, have all the press conferences you want, and you still need to get stuff done. So that's why we all have to work together.
Yes, absolutely. That reminds me that every year we used to march in the streets of Toronto. And when you go to a protest, people usually say, when there's injustices, what do we do? And the crowd responds, stand up, fight back. But because most of us in the Disability Pride March were using canes and wheelchairs and walkers, our response, the response for the crowd would be, sit down, fight back. So we would do the work and the actions from where we were. We would invite ASL, we would actually hire ASL interpreters to be part of it. We didn't just assume that deaf people wouldn't be interested in participating. We actually wanted them to be part of it. But to answer your questions, Melissa, at every turn or every opportunity we have, not just during the election process or the campaigning process, but at every time, try to create an imaginary situation in this politician's mind. When you go to vote, you secretly mark your choice. Would you go outside of the booth and give your ballot to somebody else who's going to see your vote and they can deposit it? How does that make you feel? And everybody was like, no, the vote is secret and sacred. No. And I go, well, many people who have different kinds of limitations and impairments, that's how they vote. But others, because of that, because the sacred process is broken, they just won't go to vote. If they cannot read English, because many immigrants like me, we can speak English, but maybe we didn't learn to read or write. So they also feel like, I don't want to be that person that needs somebody to be reading the stuff for me, right? So there's all of these barriers for participation. they need to know because they're the ones, if elected, will be empowered to break these barriers, right? And for example, in Toronto, at the local level, you can vote in the curb. So if you cannot get out of the taxi, somebody from the polling station will leave from the library or the school or the church basement, walk the ballot all the way to where you are and allow you to vote because they understand how important this right is the one thing that you and only you can do. So this should be supported by everyone, every party, every person and organization that works in this civic participation. They should be invested in eliminating barriers all year round, not just during the election process.
Thank you both. Janet, just because you brought up elections there, I will say as we get closer to a federal election, whenever that seems like it's going to take place, we will be providing more information about the accommodations that people can either request or that will be available when people go to vote. I know one of them is if you can't physically vote on your own, if you need someone to assist you, the person that assists you, that could be anyone that you want. They don't have to be even a voting age. What happens is they sign something that says that they're sworn to secrecy of whatever your vote is.
Yes.
But I do know that there are differences whether you're voting at a federal election, a provincial election, or a municipal election in terms of the accessibility that you can expect. And I think that's something that we need to work on, maybe creating some consistency, because it's very confusing for people who might have expected something at, say, a provincial or municipal election that maybe the federal election does differently.
Yep.
So as we get closer to a federal election, whenever that happens, part of this project too will be creating even more materials about that you can look forward to.
Just that one point, Melissa, and thank you, Janet, and for bringing that up. Also, one of the jobs of, Disability Matter votes and Barrier Free is just to get people out to say you have the right to vote, right? If like some folks don't think, oh, it doesn't affect me, or their staff, that support them in their living situation, it's their right to go out and vote. And so, when talking to politicians and talking to different political parties, and when you're activating your issue, whatever that might be, is, saying we have active ways of getting people out to vote and educating them. One of the MLAs that I was working with DM Vote was he only won by 112 votes, right? Like we're talking very small margins here.
Yes.
So like we matter, right? And that was our call sign for DM Vote is who matters, we matter, right? And it's, again, how do you evaluate or value people with disabilities and anything? And we're not going away. That's the big thing. So.
Thank you, both of you. My last question is just if you have any suggestions for folks that would like to get involved either in your specific organizations or just generally speaking of an advocacy organization.
Well, I mean, just like Janet and Melissa, disability is a wide-ranging issue, right? And it's complex, and it's not one easy box that you check off as a consultation or whatever. So whomever is listening, when you find that issue or that problem that you want to solve, that you're passionate about, there's folks out there that you can work together with. So reach out, make those connections, put in the time, and it might just be as easy as coming to a meeting, right? There's nothing worse you have a rally and nobody shows up. So yeah, we really do need to, you know, have a rising tide to raise all boats, so.
Absolutely. Yes. So in general, I would say, um, if people want to um, get involved, usually in this society that nobody accepts an error or mistake. You have to say the right thing. You have to use the big words. We don't have that. You can come with your interests, and the beauty of working in community, just like today, I'm learning from Cheryl, I'm learning from Melissa, I'm learning from David. And this is something that I can now incorporate, of obviously always giving credit to community for my learnings. But we have that invitation that we are all here to learn. So whatever you learn today, you can also activate it, like you were saying, David, and put it to practice. And that fulfilling, that self-efficacy cycle makes people think like, oh, they told me how to look who my MPP or MLA is. Now I know how to access them. There's basic things people don't know. As organizers of any disability inclusion action or event, if you go through the process of engaging hiring an ASL interpreter, or you're going to have closed captions, or whatever other accommodations you're going to have, please announce it. So people who are deaf, for example, they usually said, I would love to go to that event, but if they don't see the icon, or you don't tell them there's going to be interpretation, they assume there won't be interpretation, they just don't sign up, right? And so you're putting the effort, let people know about your resources. Now, specifically for disability without poverty, I'm putting a link on the chat because now that the legislation is passed and there's the government is creating all the regulations, we as grassroots people, any person, we want to shape the CDB. So it's called the Shape the Canada Disability Benefit. And there's a lot of information, how you can get engaged, even if you just want to click and receive the newsletter so you're informed. Or maybe you can be invited to the next fireside chat where the executive director and president of this nonprofit organization talk about what's happening with the government and the work they do at that level.
Thank you so much, both of you, for your sharing all of your knowledge of this. This was a really fruitful conversation. I knew it would be inviting both of you in. I think it's 2 minutes to 12. If there is a burning question, maybe from one of the participants, I saw a question from Yobi about when people with disabilities got the right to vote. That's a bit of a complicated question because I don't know if people with disabilities broadly were actively discriminated against unless they lived in institutions. So I don't know if either of you have a better answer to that other than when deinstitutionalization started to take place. But off the top of my head,
I don't know the exact date, but I know folks with an intellectual disability didn't get their right to vote until relatively recently, but I don't know the exact date. You know,
yeah.
Yeah, it's always been a burden, right? Whether it's there or not, right? But we need to educate and activate everybody.
Yeah. I don't think the accommodations that we have now have always existed either, but I don't know exactly when they came into place either.
Yeah.
And I know that even over my lifetime, they've changed. So it's a good question. We should look into it more.
Yes, I agree. And support it.
Yeah.
See, there's always work to do.
Unfortunately.
Okay, well, it's just about 12, so I'm gonna say thank you to David and Janet for sharing all of your wonderful knowledge with us today. And thank you so much to our ASL interpreter for your hard work, and to Cheryl for facilitating, and our participants for being here. This has been a really great session, everybody.
Yes.
I will just say for the sake of the video and for all of you here that if you would like to participate in our Elections Canada project further, we'll be including links at the bottom of this video, and this recording will be posted very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to meet everybody.
Thanks everyone for coming.